Dr. Diana Walsh was having what she generously called a Tuesday when the emergency alert came through her comm unit. In Diana's professional vocabulary, a Tuesday was any day that started with someone asking her to do something that would probably violate several interspecies treaties, basic safety protocols, and her own sense of self-preservation. The fact that it was actually Thursday just proved that the universe had no respect for her organizational systems. "Dr. Walsh," crackled the voice of Ambassador Crixtal through the static-laden transmission. "We have a situation that requires your particular expertise." Diana paused in the middle of treating a Zephyrian cloud cat's digestive issues. Apparently, the species had never encountered Earth catnip before, and the results were both hilarious and mildly explosive. Let me guess. Someone fed chocolate to Aquilix again? Or did another diplomat try to pet a Thargonian spinehound? Negative, Doctor. This is more serious. The way Crixtal's mandibles clicked suggested this was going to be one of those calls that ended with Diana questioning her life choices. Again. She'd come to the Galactic Conservation Station hoping for a quiet posting cataloging alien fauna. Instead, she'd spent the last 6 months explaining to various species why their perfectly safe pets kept trying to eat their neighbors, why Earth animals weren't suitable for most alien diets, and why, no, she could not make their pet more aggressive just because it would be culturally appropriate. How serious are we talking? Scale of 1 to Diana needs to update her will? There are predator cubs, extremely dangerous ones. They were captured in a war zone, and they're too aggressive for our standard handlers. The facility director is considering euthanization. Diana's hands stilled on her patient. In her 15 years as a veterinarian, first on Earth dealing with everything from hamsters to hippos, then out here in the cosmic zoo, she'd learned to read between the lines. Too aggressive in alien speak usually meant scared, traumatized, and acting like any sensible creature would when surrounded by things trying to poke them with unfamiliar instruments. "What species?" she asked, already reaching for her emergency kit. Because of course, she was going to say yes. Diana had never met a dangerous animal that didn't improve with proper care, appropriate medication, and someone who actually understood basic animal psychology. Vashti'ki. The cubs were separated from their pack during the conflict with War-King Vash'tok's forces. Our xenobiologists believe they may have been altered, enhanced for combat purposes. Diana blinked. "You want me to handle military-grade predator cubs that have been genetically modified for warfare? If anyone can safely evaluate them, Doctor, it's you. Your reputation for handling impossible cases is well documented." By well documented, Crixtal meant the subject of 17 incident reports and 1 very confused medical board inquiry. Diana had a gift for getting along with things that wanted to eat other things. It was a skill that had served her well on Earth and apparently translated surprisingly well to intergalactic veterinary medicine. "Fine," she said, because she'd apparently left her sense of self-preservation back on Earth along with her last shred of sanity. "Send me the files. And Crixtal, I'm going to need authorization for Class 7 sedatives, a portable surgical unit, and about 6 different types of emergency antidotes." "Already arranged, Doctor. Transport leaves in 2 hours." The connection ended, and Diana stared at her comm unit with the sort of expression usually reserved for tax audits and family reunions. "Well," she told the cloud cat, who was currently purring in harmonics that made her teeth itch, "looks like we're upgrading to a Wednesday." 2 hours later, Diana found herself aboard a diplomatic transport heading toward the neutral zone, reviewing files that made her increasingly certain someone had confused animal rescue with suicide mission. The Vashti'ki were described in the xenobiology reports as apex predators with enhanced aggression, pack hunting behaviors, and resistance to conventional pacification methods. The attached photos showed creatures that looked like someone had crossed a wolf with a dragon, and then given the result, anger management issues. "The cubs in question were recovered from a forward military position," explained Commander Thylex, the transport's security officer, as Diana scrolled through increasingly alarming biological data. "Intelligence suggests they may have been bred specifically for combat operations." Diana looked up from a report detailing jaw pressure measurements that could apparently crush most known armor materials. Let me get this straight. War-King Vash'tok, who, according to these files, has personally conquered 17 star systems, had his people breeding super predators for military use. And now you want me to evaluate whether these baby super predators can be rehabilitated? That's an accurate summary, yes. And nobody thought to mention this was essentially a military operation when I volunteered. Thylex's facial tendrils twitched in what Diana had learned to recognize as alien discomfort. The classification parameters were fluid. The cubs are technically civilian casualties of war, making this a humanitarian mission under Galactic Convention Article 847b. Right. Humanitarian mission. Got it. Diana returned to the files, muttering under her breath about bureaucrats and their creative interpretations of reality. Any particular reason why your regular handlers can't manage baby predators? 3 separate teams have attempted evaluation. All required medical intervention. Diana paused. Medical intervention as in, they got a few scratches, or medical intervention as in, they're being fitted for prosthetics? The latter, I'm afraid. Fantastic. Diana closed the files and leaned back in her seat, watching the stars streak past through the transport's viewport. You know, when I applied for off-world veterinary work, the recruitment brochure mentioned exciting opportunities to work with exotic species. It didn't specifically mention possible death by genetically enhanced war cubs, but I suppose that falls under the exciting opportunities category. Commander Thylex made a sound that might have been agreement or possibly indigestion. Doctor, if I may ask, why did you volunteer for this assignment? The mission parameters clearly indicated extreme danger. Diana shrugged. Because someone told me there were scared baby animals that needed help, and apparently I'm constitutionally incapable of saying no to that combination of words. Besides, how dangerous can they really be? They're cubs. Worst case scenario, I get a few bite marks and some interesting scars. What Diana didn't know, because nobody had bothered to mention it in the mission briefing, was that every major intelligence agency in 3 sectors was currently monitoring their transport. The cubs she was heading to evaluate weren't just any Vashti'ki young. They were the offspring of War-King Vash'tok's personal guard, taken during a raid that had cost the lives of 17 elite commandos and triggered what was being called the most significant military escalation in galactic history. From the perspective of every military strategist watching the situation unfold, the humans had just dispatched their most dangerous operative on what could only be an assassination mission disguised as a veterinary consultation. The fact that this operative was currently reading through behavioral enrichment techniques for traumatized predators and making notes about proper nutrition for growing carnivores was information that somehow hadn't made it into any intelligence briefings. As their transport approached the detention facility, Diana was mentally preparing treatment protocols for what she assumed were some very scared, very dangerous animals who'd had their lives turned upside down by war. The galaxy, meanwhile, was holding its collective breath, waiting to see what the human's secret weapon would do when she came face to face with the enemy's most prized military assets. It was going to be quite the surprise for everyone involved. Diana's first clue that something was seriously wrong with her mission briefing came when she walked into the detention facility and found what were obviously children cowering in the corner of a sterile containment cell. Her second clue was the way they looked at her with unmistakably intelligent eyes that held far too much fear and understanding for any non-sentient predator. "Are you kidding me?" she muttered, setting down her veterinary kit and pulling out her tablet to file what was about to be a very strongly worded incident report. They're kids. They're actual, literal children. The facility supervisor, a nervous Quillex named Supervisor Nexus, wrung his tentacles anxiously. "Dr. Walsh, I must stress that these subjects are extremely dangerous. Our previous evaluation teams were probably terrified because they were treating frightened children like wild animals," Diana interrupted, crouching down to eye level with the 3 young Vashti'ki. They looked like scaled winged versions of particularly serious 10-year-olds, complete with the sort of defiant posture that screamed, "Adults are stupid, and we don't trust any of you." She'd seen that look before. Every animal shelter volunteer knew it well. the expression of something young and scared that had learned the hard way that the world was full of things that wanted to hurt it. "Hey there," she said softly, not moving closer but making sure her voice carried. "I'm Diana. I know this sucks, and I know the grown-ups have been pretty awful so far, but I'm here to help figure out what you need to be okay." The largest of the three, a young male with distinctive silver markings along his scales, tilted his head in a gesture so achingly familiar that Diana felt her chest tighten. It was the same head tilt her old dog used to give when trying to figure out if she was friend or threat. "You understand me," she continued, watching their reactions carefully. "And you're scared, and probably hungry, and definitely tired of being poked at by people who don't know the first thing about taking care of kids." She pulled a protein bar from her kit, standard emergency rations, but sweet enough to appeal to most species. "Want to try this? It's not much, but it's better than whatever they've been feeding you." The cubs exchanged glances. Quick, subtle communication that definitely wasn't animal behavior. Diana made another mental note for her growing incident report and slowly placed the protein bar on the floor between them. 3 sectors away, War-King Vash'tok was having what could generously be described as a complete psychological breakdown. "Explain to me," he growled at his intelligence officers, his massive frame radiating the sort of controlled fury that had toppled governments. "How a single human infiltrated our most secure facility, subdued 3 of our most promising young warriors, and extracted them without triggering a single alarm." General Korthax shuffled his reports nervously. "My lord, according to our sources, the human called herself a veterinarian. She appeared to be treating them for injuries." "A what?" "A medical professional? For animals, apparently. She gave them food and was observed providing what appeared to be therapeutic intervention." Vash'tok's yellow eyes narrowed to slits. "You're telling me the humans sent an animal doctor to capture my bloodline? The intelligence suggests she may have been using some form of advanced psychological manipulation." The cubs appeared to respond positively to her presence. The War-King was quiet for a long moment, processing information that didn't fit any tactical framework he understood. In his experience, there were exactly 2 ways to handle Vashti'ki young: overwhelming force or complete submission to pack hierarchy. The idea that someone could simply talk to them was so far outside his worldview that it felt like a fundamental law of physics had been casually violated. "Show me the surveillance footage," he commanded. Meanwhile, at the Galactic Council emergency session, panic was reaching levels that threatened to destabilize the political structure of 3 different star systems. "The humans have deployed their secret weapon," announced Councillor Vexithara, her crystalline form resonating with barely controlled terror. "Our xenobiology experts believe this Diana Walsh represents a new class of human operative, one trained specifically in psychological manipulation of enemy young." Ambassador Krixtal's mandibles clicked frantically as he tried to process the reports flooding in from the detention facility. "According to the latest updates, she's established what our analysts are calling pack dominance over the Vashti'ki cubs in under 30 minutes. They're following her around, voluntarily." "How is that possible?" demanded General Thylex. "Those cubs have injured 3 separate evaluation teams. Our behavioral specialists theorize she may be using pheromone manipulation or some form of telepathic influence," Vexithara continued. "The implications for human military capabilities are staggering." None of them mentioned that the secret weapon's latest status report included a request for juice boxes, coloring materials, and someone to explain why nobody had told her the subjects were clearly sentient beings who needed educational enrichment activities, not medical restraints. Back at the facility, Diana was having the sort of day that made her question every life choice that had led her to this point. She'd managed to establish that the cubs were indeed children. Intelligent, articulate children who spoke perfect Galactic standard, and had been separated from their families during what was apparently a very nasty military conflict. "Let me get this straight," she said to the eldest cub, who'd introduced himself as Kethra. "Your father is some kind of military leader. You 3 were captured during a battle, and now everyone thinks I'm here to—" "What, exactly?" "The adults believe you are a warrior sent to eliminate us," Kethra replied with the sort of matter-of-fact tone that only children could manage when discussing their potential execution. The facility staff have been discussing termination protocols. Diana felt something cold settle in her stomach. Termination protocols. It is understandable, the youngest Lyrith added quietly. We are the offspring of their enemies. In most cultures, enemy young are not permitted to survive. Well, that's the most horrifying thing I've heard today, and considering my day started with someone asking me to evaluate military-grade predator cubs, that's saying something. Diana stood up, her expression shifting from concerned veterinarian to something significantly more dangerous. Nobody is terminating anybody on my watch, especially not kids. She pulled out her comm unit and began composing what was going to be a very unpleasant conversation with every authority figure she could reach. Because apparently, in addition to being a veterinarian, a xenobiologist, and an accidental diplomat, she was now going to have to become a child advocate for species she'd never heard of until this morning. Dr. Walsh, Supervisor Nexus, approached nervously. I've received urgent communications from the Galactic Council. They're requesting immediate updates on your methods. My methods? Diana looked up from her comm unit where she was drafting a report that began with the words, "Are you all insane?" in 16-point font. You mean my method of treating scared children like children instead of wild animals? Yeah, it's called basic human decency. I'll be sure to include detailed instructions in my report. What Diana didn't know was that across the galaxy, every military strategist was frantically trying to decode her tactical approach. Her request for educational materials was being analyzed as psychological warfare. Her establishment of regular mealtimes was being studied as a form of conditioning protocol. Her gentle, patient interaction with the cubs was being classified as advanced interrogation technique. And deep in enemy territory, War-King Vash'tok was staring at surveillance footage of a human female teaching his son how to properly hold a stylus for writing, trying to decide if she was the most dangerous enemy he'd ever encountered, or the first adult in the galaxy who actually understood how to interact with Vashti'ki young. Prepare my ship, he told his officers quietly. I'm going to meet this human myself. Diana was in the middle of explaining the importance of consistent sleep schedules to 3 increasingly attentive Vashti'ki cubs when the facility's proximity alarm started screaming. Through the reinforced windows, she could see what appeared to be half the enemy fleet dropping out of hyperspace with all the subtlety of a meteor shower. Well, she said, not looking up from the behavioral assessment form she'd been filling out for the past 6 hours. I guess that's Daddy coming to pick up the kids. Supervisor Nexus burst into the containment area, his tentacles writhing with panic. Dr. Walsh! War-King Vash'tok himself is demanding immediate access to the facility. He's brought 17 warships and is transmitting what our translators are calling ritualistic battle hymns of vengeance. Diana glanced at the cubs, who had perked up considerably at the mention of their father. Right, okay. Has anyone prepared the custody transfer paperwork? The what? Custody transfer paperwork, legal documentation, medical records, behavioral assessments. Diana waved the stack of forms she'd been diligently completing. You can't just hand children over to someone without proper documentation. There are protocols. The silence that followed was the sort usually reserved for moments when someone casually mentions they've accidentally declared war on a neighboring galaxy. Doctor, Nexus said carefully, you're treating this like a civilian matter. Because it is a civilian matter. These are children who've been separated from their family. The fact that their father happens to be a military leader doesn't change basic child welfare protocols. Diana stood up, brushing imaginary dust off her lab coat. Kethra, Lyrith, Velkar, your dad's here. Are you ready to see him? The cubs exchanged those quick, wordless glances again. He will be angry, Kethra said quietly. We were supposed to fight. We were supposed to resist capture. Instead, Lyrith gestured helplessly. We liked you. We felt safe. Diana felt something twist in her chest. Hey, look at me. All of you. She waited until she had their attention. Feeling safe is not a failure. Being kind is not a weakness. And any parent worth the title should be proud that their children know the difference between someone who wants to help and someone who wants to hurt them. What she didn't know was that every word of this conversation was being broadcast live to the Galactic Council's emergency session, where military strategists were frantically trying to decode what they assumed was the most sophisticated psychological manipulation they'd ever witnessed. 20 minutes later, Diana found herself face-to-face with War-King Vash'tok, and her first thought was that someone had clearly been overfeeding him. Her second thought was that his posture screamed aggressive territorial display, which in her professional experience usually meant the animal in question was more scared than angry. "You," Vash'tok rumbled, his voice carrying the sort of authority that had commanded fleets and toppled governments, "are the human who has captured my offspring. I'm the veterinarian who's been taking care of your kids while the adults figured out how to handle a custody situation without starting a war," Diana replied, consulting her tablet. "And speaking of which, we need to discuss some behavioral concerns I've noted in my assessments." The War-King blinked. It was possibly the first time in his adult life that someone had responded to his intimidation display by pulling out what appeared to be a report card. "You have been assessing my children? Standard protocol. Medical evaluation, psychological assessment, behavioral observation, dietary analysis." Diana scrolled through her notes. "The good news is, they're all physically healthy, highly intelligent, and demonstrate excellent problem-solving skills. The concerning news is that they show signs of chronic stress, inadequate socialization with peers, and what I can only describe as learned hypervigilance." Behind Vash'tok, his entourage of military advisors were taking notes with the sort of intensity usually reserved for decoding enemy battle plans. Every word Diana spoke was being analyzed, dissected, and filed under advanced human psychological warfare techniques. "Furthermore," Diana continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that she was lecturing one of the galaxy's most feared military leaders like he was a pet owner who'd been neglecting his goldfish, "their nutritional needs aren't being met. Growing Vashti'ki require a much higher protein intake than what they've been receiving, and their calcium levels are borderline deficient." "You are criticizing my parenting methods," Vash'tok said slowly. "I'm making recommendations based on professional observation." "There's a difference." Diana looked up from her tablet. "When was the last time you actually spent time with them? Not training time, not evaluation time, just time. Playing, talking, being together." The War-King was quiet for so long that his advisors began to shift nervously. In the observation gallery above, Ambassador Krixtal was frantically updating his reports. "Human operative has successfully achieved psychological dominance over enemy commander. Vash'tok appears to be considering her demands." "They are warriors," Vash'tok finally said. "They must be trained for conflict." "They're children," Diana shot back. "They should be trained for life. And based on my observations, they're going to be remarkable adults if you give them the chance to develop properly." She gestured toward the containment area where the cubs were watching through the transparent barrier. "Look at them. Really look. They're not weapons. They're your kids." What followed was possibly the most surreal 2 hours in recorded galactic diplomatic history. Diana, armed with her assessment forms and an apparently complete inability to be intimidated by galactic warlords, walked War-King Vash'tok through what she called Basic Parenting 101. The fact that she was doing this while he was surrounded by enough military hardware to level a small moon only seemed to make her more determined to get her points across. "Positive reinforcement," she explained, pulling up behavioral charts on her tablet, "is significantly more effective than punishment-based training. When Kithra successfully completed the cognitive puzzles I designed, his performance improved by 40% with simple verbal praise." "You gave my son puzzles?" Vash'tok asked, in the tone of someone trying to understand a foreign concept. "Educational enrichment activities. Mental stimulation is crucial for proper cognitive development." Diana showed him holographic displays of the cubs working through problem-solving exercises. "Look at those coordination patterns. Look at that spatial reasoning. These kids are brilliant, but they need appropriate challenges." In the observation gallery, General Thylex was updating his tactical assessment. "Human operative has somehow convinced enemy commander to participate in what appears to be advanced strategic planning session. Vash'tok is taking notes?" Because he was. The War-King, who had conquered 17 star systems, was sitting in a sterile facility conference room, listening to a human veterinarian explain childhood developmental psychology and actually writing things down. Environmental enrichment is also critical, Diana continued. They need space to play, opportunities for social interaction, access to educational materials appropriate for their developmental stage. She pulled up another chart. Based on my observations, I'd recommend at least 4 hours of unstructured playtime daily, regular interaction with peers, and exposure to problem-solving activities that challenge but don't overwhelm them. You want me to let them play? I want you to let them be children. There's plenty of time for military training when they're older and have developed the emotional regulation skills to handle it properly. Diana leaned forward. Your Majesty, with all due respect, you're raising the next generation of leaders. Do you want them to be effective because they're terrified of making mistakes, or because they're confident in their abilities and judgment? The question hung in the air like a live grenade. Finally, Vash'tok spoke. Show me these enrichment activities. 30 minutes later, the galaxy watched in absolute bewilderment as surveillance feeds showed the most feared military leader in 3 sectors sitting on the floor of a containment facility, helping his youngest child with what appeared to be an art project. The human has achieved complete psychological dominance, reported Dr. Melixon to the emergency council session. Vash'tok is now following her behavioral modification protocols without question. How is this possible? Demanded Counselor Vexithera. Our xenopsychologists believe she may be using some form of species-specific manipulation technique. Her ability to modify behavioral patterns in both the cubs and their father suggests an understanding of Vashti'ki psychology that surpasses our current scientific knowledge. What they couldn't see from the surveillance feeds was Diana's growing sense of unease, because as she watched Vash'tok interact with his children, awkwardly, hesitantly, but with genuine effort, she was starting to piece together why 3 obviously intelligent, emotionally healthy children had been labeled as dangerous predator cubs in need of evaluation. Your Majesty, she said carefully, can I ask why your children were in a military facility to begin with? The reports I received suggested they were captured during combat operations. Vash'tok's expression shifted, and for a moment he looked less like a galactic warlord and more like a parent facing an uncomfortable truth. They were removed from the primary compound for evaluation. What kind of evaluation? They were deemed unsuitable for military development. Diana felt something cold settle in her stomach. Unsuitable how? The War-King was quiet for a long moment, watching his children work on their projects. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. They show empathy. They refuse to harm others, even in training scenarios. They ask questions about the necessity of conflict. He looked up at Diana. In our culture, such traits are considered defective. The silence that followed was deafening. Diana stared at him, processing what she'd just heard. These children had been removed from their home, labeled as defective, and scheduled for termination because they were too kind, too thoughtful, too unwilling to hurt others. When she finally spoke, her voice was very, very quiet. Get out. I beg your pardon? I said get out. All of you. Now. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Diana stood up, her expression shifting from professional concern to something significantly more dangerous. You're telling me that you separated these children from their family, subjected them to psychological evaluation, and were prepared to have them killed because they have empathy? Because they won't blindly follow orders to hurt others? The War-King had faced down enemy fleets, survived assassination attempts, and conquered civilizations. But something in the human woman's voice made him take an involuntary step backward. Dr. Walsh, Supervisor Nexus began nervously. No. Diana's voice cut through the air like a blade. Everyone out. Now. I need to make some calls. As the facility cleared, leaving Diana alone with the 3 cubs who were watching her with wide, uncertain eyes, she pulled out her comm unit and began scrolling through her contacts. Because apparently, in addition to being a veterinarian, a xenobiologist, an accidental diplomat, and a child advocate, she was now going to have to become something else entirely. Someone was about to learn what happened when you threatened children in front of a human who decided those children were under her protection. And the galaxy was about to discover that there were some lines you simply didn't cross. Diana stood before the Galactic Council, with the sort of righteous fury usually reserved for particularly contentious PTA meetings. "Let me make this perfectly clear," she said, her voice carrying dangerous calm. "You were going to kill 3 children because they had empathy. Because they refused to hurt others. Because they asked questions." The council chamber went very quiet. "Do you have any idea what those traits actually indicate?" Emotional intelligence. Problem-solving skills. The ability to consider consequences. These aren't defects. These are the foundations of actual leadership. Ambassador. Krixtal's mandibles clicked nervously. "Dr. Walsh, different species have different developmental..." "Different species. Same basic neurology when it comes to childhood trauma," Diana interrupted. "Separating children from families, labeling them defective, and threatening termination causes psychological damage that lasts a lifetime." What Diana didn't know was that her lecture on attachment theory and trauma responses was being interpreted by military strategists as the most terrifying declaration of war they'd ever encountered. "She's outlined our complete psychological vulnerability," whispered General Thylax. 3 species formally surrendered to Earth's Superior Psychological Warfare Division, before Diana finished explaining why consistent sleep schedules were important. The revolution happened entirely by accident. Diana's child welfare protocols, initially a strongly worded letter about not killing children, became the foundation for the Galactic Convention on the Rights of Developing Sentience. Her insistence that empathy was strength, not weakness, triggered a philosophical movement across 17 star systems. War-King Vash'tok became her most devoted student. "The protein ratios for optimal development," he would say during former military strategy meetings, "must be carefully calculated based on age and activity level." His generals, now taking notes on advanced child-rearing techniques, would nod seriously. Diana, meanwhile, discovered her job had expanded to Galactic Child Welfare Coordinator, a position that hadn't existed until she'd made it necessary. "I didn't ask for this," she told Supervisor Nexus, now her assistant. "No one who's good at something ever does," he replied, sorting requisition forms for therapeutic play equipment across 3 sectors. 6 months later, Diana reviewed case files in her new office, wondering how her life had gotten so cosmically weird. "I went from treating sick puppies to accidentally ending several wars," she muttered. "And the paperwork is still the worst part." A message chimed. Video from Kethra, Lirith, and Velkar showed them leading an interspecies friendship program, teaching formerly hostile civilizations how to play together. "We used your techniques," Lirith explained proudly. "Positive reinforcement, emotional validation, structured social interaction. Also snacks," Velkar added. "Snacks are important for bridge building." Diana smiled, making a note to send more educational materials. Another chime. Formal request from the Quillix territories for human specialists to evaluate their behaviorally non-conforming youth. Then another from the Vryn Collective. Then 3 more from species she'd never heard of. Diana stared at the requests, then at her empty coffee cup. "I'm going to need a bigger office. And possibly a degree in intergalactic child psychology." She started drafting responses, explaining that behaviorally non-conforming probably just meant normal kid who doesn't fit arbitrary standards, and the solution was usually listen to them and stop forcing them into boxes. Simple stuff, really. Shouldn't have been revolutionary. But apparently was. Across the galaxy, Diana's methods were being studied and implemented. Her insistence on treating children as individuals was reshaping educational systems, military training, and entire cultural attitudes. And Diana? Just trying to keep up with paperwork. "Next time someone offers me exciting opportunities with exotic species," she muttered, signing requisitions for therapeutic art supplies, "I'm asking for the full job description first." But she was already reviewing the next case file, already planning interventions, already thinking about the next group of children who needed someone to see them as more than their species' expectations. Because that's what Diana did. She helped kids, whether they had fur, scales, tentacles, or crystalline structures. Kids were kids, and they all deserved someone who would fight for their right to be exactly who they were. Even if it accidentally started a revolution. Even if it meant unreasonable amounts of paperwork. Even if it turned a veterinarian into the galaxy's most unexpected force for peace. Diana Walsh, accidentally ending wars, one child welfare protocol at a time.